this thing working? Give me some sound over here. Yeah.
The Out of Bounds Show is powered by the award-winning golf courses at Dancing Rabbit Golf Club in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
GenesPage.com, the Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports. Steve Robertson joining us on the Out of Bounds Show. The SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by the all-new Nissan Pathfinder at Cannon Nissan in Jackson and the Nissan Rogue, the crossover. It's an all-new body style for the Nissan Pathfinder. You'll love it. Check it out this week. And the show is brought to you by Independent Roofing Systems, the #1 commercial industrial roofing company in Mississippi. Independent Roofing Systems, roofing.ms. Steve Robertson joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Steve, Scott Berry retiring. Christian Ostrander will be their next head coach. Talked that Jay Johnson reached out last year. He said no. And do you think he was on Chris Lemonis' short list, the pitching coach and future head coach at Southern Miss?
I think he had to be, right? I mean, when you look at the job that he's done, at Delta State and Jones, and of course at Southern Miss, people in the industry have a lot of respect for Oz, and not just because of his ability to develop pitchers, but to identify them and then kind of find the puzzle pieces to put it together. He is a big, big, big component to the Southern Miss machine, and I think it's an obvious choice. You just go ahead and elevate him. And there were some rumors last week. People were asking me when I was on the road, hey, do you think Ostrander is a candidate? I said, well, yeah, I think you got to make the phone call. And I found out that maybe it's not contractual, but it's kind of understood that he was kind of the coach in waiting there at Southern Miss. And so I think that'll be a very, very tidy and quick coaching search for the Golden Eagles.
Okay. He's a talented talent. I mean, Scott Berry was talented. And like you said, so is Christian Ostrander. Man, something about that blood and Delta State water when it comes to baseball. And, of course, Jeremy McClain, the AD, playing there at Delta State, too. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. Okay, so as you size this thing up, you feel like Chris Lemonis will be back. So basically, if he's identified a pitching coach that's in the postseason, then it could be a little while. If not, then what? He can name one next week? How do you see it?
Yeah, it could go like that. I mean, obviously, the guys they want to talk to officially, are still coaching, and everybody's still fighting for their conference tournament and a chance to get into a regional somewhere. And so, yeah, that'll complicate things a little bit. The longer it goes, the more difficult it becomes in some respects because, the portal's fixing to open up, for transfers for baseball. And so, you got to go out there and get some pitchers, as you and I know. They've got to go out and they certainly got to go get a couple of guys that can help you on the weekend. And so you got to be able to tell them who's going to be coaching them. And so, yeah, that's something you got to work through. And I'm sure there will probably be some, back channel agreements before anything is made official. Because you and I both know nobody in college athletics ever gets offered a job if they're ready to take it. But the reality of it is, I know that Chris Lemonis has already begun doing his due diligence, and there's already been some back channel conversation with some people. So I think this thing will move rather quickly, but it'll move quickly behind the scenes. And then once that coach's season's over, they'll make an announcement shortly thereafter.
Mid-major? Yeah.
I suspect that'll be the case, but there's some guys out there that are on the list, I'm sure. There's some guys out there, obviously, that may get head coaching opportunities as well, that are on your list, because you got to get this one right. I mean, you can't go out there and get a scratch and dent guy and hope for the best. You got to get a proven guy. So, but I do think it'll probably be a G5 guy, and you probably got to do some things contractually too. You probably got to give a guy, some assurance. Hey, we'll give you a 2-year deal, and that way, hey, you're moving your family here. It's not a deal where you're going to be looking for a job next year and not at least have a little coin in the bank.
What do you think Scott Foxhall was making? $400 to $500?
Probably north of that, actually. So, it's State had the highest paid coaching staff in the country when you factor in the assistant coaches. And so Jake Gautreaux and Chris Lemonis and Scott Foxhall have made a lot of money. They've done some big things. Last 2 years, not as much. But, State's prepared to write a big check.
Do you think they'll go north of 400,000 or 500,000? So this G5 guy could be making 100, right? I mean, there's not that much money in baseball. Nobody makes any money. So as much as we love it in this state, I mean, I think that's part of the hiccup, right, Steve? They don't want to pay out $5 million to Lamonis, Gotro, and Foxhall, and then immediately bring on a head coach, several assistants, and in-house guys, which is 7 figures, all in basically 5 minutes, right?
Well, and you got to buy out their contracts, right? You got to buy out the guys that you're letting go, and you got to buy out the contracts the guys you're hiring. So it's not just the checks to the guys you're saying goodbye to. It's checks to the companies or the schools you're taking a coach from. Everybody's got some assurance. And to your point too, I saw some numbers I think yesterday that just a few years ago, that Ostrander was making less than 100,000, and so they're missed.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that and you think about all the time away from their families and things like that. I mean, obviously there's bonuses and things like that they offer people, but if you're coaching college baseball below the Power 5 level, you're doing it because you love it, not because you're getting rich. And so that's I think it makes the state job a little more attractive. Is that, hey, this is a Mississippi State program that is a blue blood program that is committed to baseball, that is willing to write a big check to get you to come there. And had dinner with my wife last night. We were talking about some of the people, and I was so and so's making X $1,000, whatever. And she made a comment, and she goes, "Yeah, if they wouldn't take that job at state, their wife would probably divorce them." I mean, you're making $100,000 now, and you could make upwards or close to $500,000 next year. Yeah, let's just take the chance, And so I think money talks, and we all know that. I mean, that's how life works. But when you're a guy on the G5 level, you're basically middle income or upper middle income, and now you have a chance to really improve the situation for your family and advance your career.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a $300,000 to $400,000 swing for a guy in a sport that there's not a lot of money. Steve,
you're about to quadruple somebody's salary. They're gonna take your call.
Okay, so multi-year, $400,000 to $500,000 minimum. Do you think Chris Lamonis can do this? Identify the right guy, and really. Who cares if anybody's heard of him? Because the overwhelming majority of us, there's 300 pitching coaches out there. Not everybody knows all these guys. All right? So he could hire a guy that nobody's heard of who is excellent, right? So what do you think Lamonis can pull this off?
I do, and of course he has to. But to your point, Bo, it doesn't matter who state hires. They're going to be half people will say, "Oh, this is a complete joke. Why don't we get this guy?" Not knowing anything about him, not knowing who he's developed or who he's worked with or anything like that. I mean, that's just the nature of social media these days. But yeah, I think he can. And the thing too is that you look at what happened last weekend, and they needed a good weekend. They needed to go down there and be competitive. And midway through the game on Sunday, you're thinking, it's going to be tough to win fans back just winning one game down here. I mean, you won one, you felt good about it, but if you could win two, you start thinking, okay, well maybe we're taking some steps towards righting the ship here. And a lot of people were kind of selling last week that the team would quit. And based on what you saw Saturday against Arkansas, there was probably some credence to that line of thinking, right? I mean, they did not look like they wanted to play baseball. And so they go down there to LSU, they get down 13-4 and come back and win a ball game. It's kind of hard to argue that he's lost a team when something like that happens.
Yeah, I think there's – so – I go back and forth on Jake Gotro. I mean, I would keep Jake Gotro if he wanted to stay, but I wonder if Jake Gotro feels like, hey, this has run its course. I need to find any way I can find to get at. Not that he doesn't love the place. It's been good to him. He's been good to MSU. But do you get the sense that Jake's going to just really, really attempt to get out?
I don't know that I would go that far, but I think his agent will probably work overtime just to see what his stock looks like. I mean, if there's some head coaching opportunities out there, I mean, you're a lot more likely to get head coaching opportunity as a sitting assistant coach than you are as a fired assistant coach, right? I mean, not that he's in any danger of being fired, but my point being is that, if his stock is going to be higher this year than it is next year, then his agent's got a responsibility to his client to go find him a job. And so that's something you consider, but I know I heard from Jake this weekend after the series was over, and Jake is committed to Mississippi State, and same time too, Jake's got a family to take care of, and so you never rule anything out. I don't think he's actively looking, but I suspect his agent is probably on the phone, just kind of seeing what the opportunities look like.
And you're confident Jake's at $500,000 plus?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, multi-year.
That's a good deal if you can get it in Starkville, Mississippi. They're not worried about the beach trip or the mortgage. Okay. All right, if you had to call it, Gotro stays or goes?
If I have to call it, I think he stays. Of course, the right opportunity comes along. You can never rule anybody out because most assistant coaches want to be head coaches at some point, at least give it a shot and try it out and see if they can get it done. But Jake told me last year, he goes, I can't leave here until this thing is fixed. There's a pride element. There's the competitive nature of all these guys. It's like, I'm not going to leave here and after winning a national championship and leave it a mess. And so, Jake feels a sense of responsibility for this team. And at times this offense has been very good, and other times it's been kind of non-existent. And, Jake's a guy that wants to win. And so I think there's that element of it too. I don't think it's, necessarily where you say, well, I've done all I can do here. I think Jake realizes that there are some things that he can do. But I also think too that, Jake's got a responsibility to his family, to do what's best for his family. But I don't think that he's just, chomping at the bit to get out.
Okay, Steve Robertson, Gene's Page 247 Sports on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. This interview is brought to you by Bulldog Burger in Ridgeland, Starkville, and Tupelo. So I know they need pitching, but let's go the core four. All right. Ross Highfield's staying. He's the glue. How do you feel about, because there's a lot of ebb and flow, and it will start literally on Sunday, as you know, or Monday. Dakota Jordan, Mershawn, and Hunter Hines. Handicap the trio, but then the foursome, counting Ross, coming back.
I think all those guys want to stay. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, obviously Hunter and Ross and Dakota are very close. And, Mershawn is a guy that's been a catalyst this year. I mean, goodness gracious, he got on base 6 times Sunday against LSU, and so I think that's a big aspect of it too, is people always want to factor in NIL, and it's certainly a possibility. It's not the issue in baseball that it is in basketball and football. People just aren't going to spend that kind of money. That's not to say they won't have an opportunity. That's not to say a third party won't contact them and at least test the waters. But I think there's a really good chance all those guys are back. Okay.
If they are, what do you think about Slade Alford? I know people have beat up on him at third base, but he looks like he's got some skills and some talent, Steve.
Well, he certainly has some ability. It's just a matter of getting it out of him. And there have been some days he's played exceptionally well, but more times than not, it's been inconsistent. I mean, even Sunday in a game that, State's come all the way back, and all you got to do is get 3 outs, and you think the game is over, and you make a big error there that's kind of unnecessary, kind of rush to play a little bit. But, yeah, I think the guy's got some potential. Now, whether he realizes that at Mississippi State kind of remains to be seen, but I think you're Kirk Simonis, you have to go get a third baseman out of the portal. Mm-hmm. You have to, whether Slade Alford stays or not. You got to get a third baseman and provide some competition there, and you may find a guy that's better. But, I mean, how long has it been since State has had, a lockdown third baseman? A decade? I mean, it's been forever. It seems like you look at other positions and you can put together an all-decade team and feel really good about that group. But I think third base has really been a question mark for State for the better part of a decade. You've got to go get a guy that can be a plus defender, but also bring some power.
Okay. So, Lamont, at least half the fan base is going to raise hell about him coming back. But at this point, I think you're at 100%, aren't you?
I'm probably 99. I'm probably 99 at this point. And you and I have talked about it. I mean, even back when State started 0-6 in the conference, I said, he'll be back. He'll be back. And, barring a complete disaster, and in some respects, we've certainly flirted with that, complete disaster, but never in the history of college baseball. In the history of college baseball has a national championship coach been fired 2 years removed from a national championship. I don't think Mississippi State's going to be the one to go make that history. Now, Ole Miss may do it next year, but I don't think Mississippi State's going to do it this year.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about it. I mean, it sounds like not just $5 million. Once you go get everybody, and bring everybody in, you could be talking 7-8 million, buying people out. That is in a sport that doesn't make much money. I mean, Mississippi State probably makes a little bit of money. What do you think State makes a year? $1 million to $2 million on baseball or more?
Well, right now I would say not that, just because of the fact that, you sold those seat licenses to build the new stadium. So you've got a ton of non-revenue producing seats there that, kind of have you right around, the Mendoza line. But I think most years State does make baseball, but the last few years State hasn't made money on baseball just because of the fact that you've got so many non-revenue producing seats. Those licenses will be up here in a few years, and then all of a sudden those seats start making money for you again. So
I got you.
You're right there. There's not a lot of money in the bank to offset, the amount of investment you'd have to make for a coaching change right now.
Okay. All right. Let's switch gears for just a second. I may go back. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show and the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. I don't want to say what's wrong with LSU and in baseball, but I mean they're still in a good spot as far as postseason and all of that. But they got absolutely taken. Their bullpen got taken to the woodshed outside of really outside of Skeens. What'd you see last weekend?
Well, it's 2 weekends in a row. That's the thing. It's like when you're dealing with the best coaches in college baseball, breaking down film and looking at tendencies, at some point they get to you. Baseball's a game of adjustments, not just in game or in weekend, but in season. And I think Jay Johnson's guys are in a difficult spot. Not that anybody's fixing to get fired, but you got the biggest payroll in the history of college baseball. And this team may not make it to Omaha, which I think makes all of us kind of take a deep breath and maybe pause this NIL conversation a little bit. And you think, wait a minute, is it even worth it, to go out here and, beg for $2 million and go put this thing together, and you go get Tommy Tanks and you get Paul Skeens. And then if you don't get the ultimate prize, you begin to ask yourself, what's the return on our investment? We could have done this without spending that kind of money, right? But there's some holes in that LSU team. And, I've been saying it all year. Something is just not right with this team. And I don't know if it's not, you bring in a bunch of mercenaries, and there's not necessarily that esprit de corps that you expect from guys like, we talk about Hunter Hines and Ross Heifel and Dakota Jordan. I mean, those guys are not just committed to Mississippi State, they're committed to each other. And you go out and you get a bunch of dudes and you put together an all-star team. That doesn't always, lend itself to building cohesion or chemistry. And so you look at this team and say, okay, well, you ought to be able to get a win with Paul Skeens every time you go out there. He's only got one loss all year. Now it's to South Carolina. He got ambushed out there. But outside of that, there's nobody you look at and say this guy's a difference maker. Ty Floyd is a good pitcher, and he pitched really well against State on Saturday, but State had their opportunities. But if you ever get into that bullpen, it's trouble. And that's the thing I share with some LSU media. Like, I was getting ready to leave, and the little student assistant guy that was sitting by me that helped run the scoreboard, he asked me, he goes, hey, Mr. Steve, he said, you've probably watched more SEC baseball than any of us. Can this LSU team win a national championship? If you guys don't want to hear this team has no chance to win a national championship in its current state. Absolutely no chance. If this team ever gets into a loser's bracket, they're in trouble. Based on what you've seen from this pitching staff the last 2 weekends, if Paul Skeens doesn't throw, do you have confidence they're going to win? And everybody's put their head down. They all see it. This team has problems. And when you get them out of that ballpark, they're in trouble. That offense will be swallowed whole in Omaha if they're lucky enough to get there. And it's not going to be a situation. You say, well, you play the SEC, and so you're always kind of super regional ready. That's just not the case. I mean, you're going to, more times than not in super regional, you're going to face three really good arms, and LSU can't counter. LSU doesn't have three really good arms to counter a super regional. You kind of, you accept the fact they're going to win with Skeens on the mound, but you still got to win another game. And who do you trot out there, and who do you feel good about in order to win 2 out of 3? And if Paul Skeens ever loses the ball game, they're finished.
All right. I think we'll leave. Who's your coach of the year? Van Horn, Butch, somebody else?
Well, I would say Dave Van Horn, and then Butch probably is my second, because you look at the injuries that Arkansas has had, and here they are, number 3 team in the country, and about to have a top 8 national seed and put themselves in position to go to Omaha. It's going to be a weird year. Because I think, I don't think there's anybody you look at and say, hey, this is the most dominant team in college baseball. But if anything, the last 2 years have shown us is that, there are no regular season national championships, right? You got to go win it in Omaha. And I think this Arkansas team might be the one nobody's talking about that's got a good chance to do it. But because of some of the things we talk about, that is a very strong core group of players, and they have worked the portal to kind of fill their gaps rather than build a team. And I think that's really the methodology that works, is you supplement where you're deficient in the portal. You don't go invest your entire roster in the portal and trying to put together some super team. This doesn't work that way.
What do you know about Kevon Lee, the running back from Penn State that Arnett and Barbay and crew landed?
Well, I like him a lot. He's kind of a Dylan Johnson type, and he's not going to come in here and supplant Woody Marks, but I think he is a role player, a guy that can be a depth guy. I think it's a good get for Mississippi State. And I like how he handled it, too. Nowadays we've got all these look-at-me guys, and, we don't do the press conferences, but, sometimes there's a ticker tape parade and things like that just for a kid announcing his commitment. This guy just kind of quietly went about his business and enrolled for summer school, right? I mean, no big announcement, no big interview, no big story. Didn't go on, Fox News or anything to announce his commitment. He just went and said, hey, I'm going to Mississippi State. And so I like the way he's going about things. But, yeah, he's a depth guy, and I think in this scheme, they'll know how to utilize him. But, yeah, he's a complimentary back in many respects to Woody Marks. I mean, Woody's the guy, and Simeon Price is the guy come along. But I think this kind of eases some concern about losing Dylan Johnson.
All right, we'll leave it there. Steve Robertson on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Okay, so the show is brought to you by Core Cryotherapy and Wellness. Speaking of cryotherapy, which is amazing, you can get it at Core Cryotherapy and Wellness in the township. It's right across from Samra, which Blake built, in the township in Ridgeland on Highland Colony. Core Cryotherapy, C-O-R-E. And it's Core Cryotherapy and Wellness. Cryotherapy is awesome. It really is. It's amazing for your body. It only takes 3 minutes. And you can do it during lunch hour. It's easy. Makes you feel better. And they'll walk you through everything. They've got a great staff there. Core Cryotherapy and Wellness in the township, Sombra. And they've got IV therapies too. A dozen plus IV therapies. And I've had several. Blake dove in and got one a couple weeks ago when he was sick. And so that's cool too. IV therapies powered by Core Cryotherapy and Wellness in the township across from Sombra. Cool. Thanks for listening to the show. We appreciate it. We love you. And great text today and interaction. Love for you to follow us on Twitter at Bowbounds. And thanks for going to Apple Podcast and Spotify and searching Out of Bounds with Bowbounds. We're going to have Michael Alford on tomorrow, Florida State Athletic Director. Looking forward to that. Have a great day. Mudbugs is open, shrimp and crawfish. And don't forget, according to Fred Smoot, and he's right, the famous charbroiled oysters at Drago's Seafood Restaurant and Oyster Bar. We'll see you tomorrow.